That day, the sky was overcast, and dark clouds filled the sky as if nature itself was participating in the funeral of Hannah. People gathered in deep silence, with only the sound of soft footsteps on the dirt road. The air seemed heavy. Each person was lost in their thoughts about someone who had left them too soon. Their eyes were filled with tears, and as they looked at the coffin, they recalled the beautiful memories of Hannah, moments filled with love and joy that she had brought to their lives. A light breeze blew through, rustling the leaves like a farewell song. Everything around was quiet, with only the sounds of nature and the passing of time filling the silence. No one spoke, no one moved, and every gaze was fixed on the coffin. Each person was immersed in their own emotions, as if each of them had a story, a memory of Hannah. But then, suddenly, a sound broke the silence. The barking of Duke, Hannah's loyal dog, echoed sharply, shattering the peaceful stillness. These were not ordinary barks, but cries filled with anxiety, unrelenting and loud. Every eye, from the elderly to the young, turned towards the dog. Duke, Hannah's inseparable companion, stood there, his eyes fixed on her coffin, his barking acting as a warning. Duke was not an ordinary dog. Known in the village as a special dog with intelligence and a sense of perception far beyond the ordinary, Duke had always been Hannah's companion. The children in the village loved the Duke, and the adults admired his loyalty and intelligence. But now, in this sacred moment, Duke was doing something no one had ever seen before. His barking didn't stop, growing louder, as if he was trying to convey something that everyone else couldn't understand. The people around looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Some tried to approach to calm the dog, but Duke simply shook his head, his eyes never leaving the coffin. A few others stood back, unsure whether to approach Duke, feeling the seriousness of his actions. Confusion and surprise were evident on their faces, and an unexplainable sensation began to spread in the air. Whispers arose, and suspicious glances were exchanged between the crowd. People began asking each other, "What is this dog seeing? Can it sense something we can't?" No one had an answer, but the unease in everyone's hearts grew. No one could understand why Duke was acting this way at such a moment. Still, some people began to sense the oddness in the air. An older woman standing nearby whispered to her companion, "This dog can feel something different. It knows something." And then something in Duke's eyes made everyone begin to doubt. Could he be seeing something they couldn't? Was there an unseen presence that they were unaware of? Despite trying to remain calm, Father Michael, the priest presiding over the funeral, could not ignore the growing tension. He stood there at the podium, his eyes fixed on Duke. The dog's barking continued as though it was pleading for someone to listen. Father Michael looked into Duke's eyes, trying to suppress the unease in his heart, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stepped down and walked towards Duke, hoping his presence would calm the dog. "Duke," Father Michael said gently, trying to offer comfort. "Calm down. Everything will be all right." But Duke just stared at him, showing no signs of stopping. His barking grew louder, more intense. At this point, the priest's expression began to change. A growing worry was visible on his face. A few people in the crowd began to look at each other, sensing the mounting tension. The children even felt a chill run down their spines as they looked at Duke with fearful eyes, as if witnessing something beyond their comprehension. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. The doubts and questions repeated more and more. Something very strange was happening here. While everyone continued to watch Duke, an unfamiliar man stood quietly at the back of the crowd. David, a newcomer to the village, felt the unease in the air and began to focus on Duke's behavior. He had been watching the dog since it first began barking, and a strange sensation began to rise in him. He sensed that this dog wasn't barking for no reason. Something more serious was happening, and he felt the need to investigate further. David approached Duke, and as he got closer, the dog seemed to recognize him. Duke stopped barking, and his eyes brightened as if they understood that David was approaching to help. He looked into Duke's eyes, and though the confusion still lingered, he spoke to the dog. "Let's figure out what's going on here." Duke no longer barked. It simply stared at David as if understanding that this person was seeking answers. The atmosphere became eerily silent, and everyone at the funeral turned their gaze toward David. Curious and surprised eyes were all on him. David realized that now, not only he but everyone was waiting for something, an explanation for this unusual occurrence. From there, the journey to uncover the truth began. David and Duke were not merely facing a secret about Hannah's death, but were about to uncover things beyond human comprehension. With each step they took, the truth became clearer, like a puzzle piece fitting into the larger picture that everyone would eventually have to confront. Duke's barking continued, echoing through the quiet area of the funeral. The dog's eyes, bright and focused, were fixed on Hannah's coffin. It wasn't just a typical display of anxiety, but a strong warning, as if it was trying to communicate a message that humans couldn't perceive. The barking didn't cease, each sound growing louder and more urgent. Those around began to feel a deep unease, as if something was lurking in the air that they couldn't explain. Some people at the funeral began to glance at each other anxiously, wondering if the dog could sense something they couldn't see. They moved closer to Duke, trying to calm it, to soothe it. But all their efforts were in vain. The dog continued to bark, its gaze never leaving the coffin, as though warning about something dangerous about to happen. Each bark felt like a blow to the silent space, breaking the solemnity of the ceremony. The barking seemed to have an odd power, making the atmosphere more tense and filled with fear. The funeral attendees began to feel a strange unease, a sense of fear they couldn't explain. Despite their attempts to comfort the dog, it still wouldn't stop. Some people even began to feel restless, walking around, not daring to look into Duke's eyes. Suspicious and curious gazes emerged in the crowd, and a sense of anxiety enveloped everything. Father Michael, the priest conducting the funeral, stood in front of the coffin, feeling the tension growing in the air. Facing the final respect for Hannah, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. The worried eyes of the people turned toward him, and a sense of discomfort began to spread within him. Father Michael, always strong and composed in difficult situations, now couldn't avoid the feeling of unease. He tried to approach Duke, hoping his presence would calm the situation. "Duke, calm down," he said softly, trying to comfort the dog. However, Duke didn't listen. The barking still echoed, growing louder, as if it was trying to convey something important that everyone else couldn't understand. The silence at the funeral became suffocating, and no one could focus on the ceremony. Every gaze was directed at Father Michael, and he began to feel the pressure from everyone's attention. The atmosphere grew heavy, and anxiety consumed the crowd. People began whispering among themselves, unable to ignore the oddity in Duke's behavior. Was the dog trying to warn about something? Was there something unknown that it was trying to point out? This question echoed in everyone's minds, and the unease in their hearts only grew stronger. Father Michael, trying to keep his composure, looked into Duke's eyes and felt an unusual tightness in his chest. Though he knew this was just a dog, what was happening made him feel an inexplicable unease. Looking into the worried eyes of the people, he realized the tension wasn't just coming from Duke's actions, but also from the uncertainty within the people themselves. They were beginning to feel confused, unsure of what to do or what to think. Duke's presence seemed to create an undercurrent in the funeral. Although Father Michael had tried to speak and calm the crowd, all he received was vague silence and suspicious glances. The whispers from the crowd grew louder, and Father Michael realized he couldn't stop the growing anxiety in the air. An elderly woman, standing nearby, gazed intently at Duke and whispered to the person next to her, "This dog might be seeing something that we can't. It might be sensing something." Her words heightened the unease in the crowd as everyone began to sense that something very strange was happening around them. Father Michael couldn't help but feel a heaviness in his heart. Although he had tried to reassure the crowd, the eyes of the people and the constant barking of the Duke only made the atmosphere harder to breathe in. The sense of worry spread everywhere, as if this wasn't just an ordinary funeral, but something far larger than their understanding. Everyone felt they were standing before something that couldn't yet be explained. Despite this, Father Michael tried to keep his composure. He looked at the coffin, attempting to focus on the final rites for Hannah, but inside his worries couldn't subside. An odd sense of unease lingered as though something was hidden, only visible to Duke. Yet, even as the tension rose, no one in the crowd dared to speak up. They all waited for something to happen. The atmosphere at the funeral became more and more tense. The attendees stood in silence, their eyes fixed on Duke, waiting for a change, a sign, something that could explain the strange occurrence. But until then, no one could explain what was happening. While the funeral was immersed in this silence, a stranger entered the village, someone no one had ever seen before. David, with a calm and cautious demeanor, observed the unfolding situation. He noticed Duke, Hannah's loyal dog, barking non-stop. Unlike the others, David had a sharp intuition, and a strange feeling arose in him. Though Duke's barking had interrupted the funeral, David didn't think it was an unconscious act. He looked at Duke, then at the coffin, and immediately realized that the dog wasn't barking for no reason. It was trying to convey something important, a message that everyone else couldn't understand. Never having seen Duke act like this and recognizing the oddness of the situation, David decided to approach the dog. He looked into Duke's eyes, speaking softly, "What are we trying to figure out here?" Strangely, upon hearing David's voice, Duke stopped barking immediately. It turned and looked at him, its eyes full of patience, as if it understood that this man was here to help. That action from Duke made David feel an unusual connection between him and the dog, as if they were sharing a common purpose. The entire crowd turned to look at David and Duke. The silence became even more oppressive as everyone followed each step of the strange man and the dog. Every gaze was filled with curiosity and worry. No one dared to speak, but all attention was focused on David's actions. At that moment, it felt as though time had stopped, and everyone was waiting to see what David would do next. He stood still, his eyes filled with determination, without a hint of doubt, then slowly moved toward the coffin as if this path was the continuation of what Duke had started. As the crowd remained silent, Father Michael, the priest presiding over the funeral, stood still, watching David's every move. The sense of tension was growing within him. Though he had always been known for his calm demeanor and emotional control, at that moment he felt an indescribable unease. Duke, Hannah's loyal dog, was clearly reacting to something that no one else could see, and now David, a stranger, was approaching the situation in a way that he couldn't understand. Father Michael quickly walked toward David, intending to stop him. "Stop, you shouldn't do this," he said, his voice trying to maintain calm, but the anxiety in his tone was undeniable. However, David didn't back down. He stood tall, his gaze resolute, and continued toward the coffin without hesitation. David's question rang out in the silent space. "How did Hannah die?" A simple question, but one that shifted everything. This question wasn't just about an ordinary death. It was the opening of a mystery that everyone, including Father Michael, feared to face. The priest immediately responded. "She died in her sleep. There was nothing unusual," Father Michael quickly answered, his tone defensive, but there was something unconvincing in his voice. He looked around the crowd, but the eyes of the people no longer believed what he said. Doubts began to arise in their minds, and none of them could feel at ease with such a simple explanation. David stood still, his eyes fixed on Father Michael. He said nothing, but his presence seemed to invite the truth. Everyone at the funeral felt that something more serious was going on. Although Father Michael continued to try to defend his story, the tension in the air could not be concealed. David knew that his question wasn't just a question of curiosity, but one from someone seeking the truth, a truth that everyone could feel but was afraid to confront. The entire village, from the elderly to the children, watched David's every move. Curious, worried, and suspicious gazes focused on him. A dense silence enveloped the church. Though everyone could feel the unease in the air, no one dared to speak, and no one dared to oppose David's resolve. He wasn't just asking a question. He was risking revealing secrets that had been buried for a long time. Father Michael felt the pressure mounting, and in a fleeting moment, he realized that the truth might be beyond his control. The priest glanced around, his eyes scanning the crowd. Signs of worry had spread, and although he tried to keep his composure, the tension was visible on his face. People began whispering among themselves, doubt and curiosity spreading. David continued standing there, his eyes never leaving Father Michael. He didn't need to say anything more, but his presence was a clear statement that no one could hide the truth forever. He had made up his mind that the truth must come out, no matter how frightening it might be. A long period of silence passed, and no one dared to speak. But finally David spoke again, this time with unwavering determination. "Hannah knew something, and I don't believe she just died peacefully like that." David's words came as a shock, not just to Father Michael, but to everyone present. At that moment, all eyes turned to Father Michael, and the priest felt that the truth he had been hiding for so long was about to be exposed. The tension reached its peak, and no one could turn their back on the truth anymore. David and Duke continued their journey, following the trail leading to the secrets Hannah had left behind. After searching throughout her house, once filled with memories and emotions, they discovered an old wooden box tucked away in the corner of the living room. Despite its age and signs of wear, the box remained sturdy. Upon opening it, they found yellowed letters written by Hannah herself. These letters not only contained personal reflections, but also critical details about what she had uncovered about Father Michael. As David read the letters, he was astonished. Hannah had uncovered a shocking truth. Father Michael, the priest everyone in the village revered and loved, was actually embezzling the congregation's donations. The letters were clear about how Father Michael had exploited the community's trust to amass large sums of money for personal gain, using it for nefarious purposes. The letters also revealed that Hannah had found evidence of this corruption, and perhaps it was because she knew too much that she became a target. It seemed likely that this was the reason she was murdered, to silence her and prevent her from exposing the truth about Father Michael. David paused, a chill spreading through his chest. He realized the gravity of what he had just discovered, but he knew that these pieces of evidence alone weren't enough to expose the full truth. She had left clues, but David still needed to find more concrete evidence. He continued searching the house, leaving no detail unchecked, knowing that every step he took brought him closer to uncovering the truth he was meant to find. While examining an old photo of Hannah, David was startled to discover a small key hidden behind the photo. This key was no ordinary object, and he quickly realized that it could open a secret storage in the church, a place he had heard rumors about in the village, a hidden vault where Father Michael had once worked. This key was a clear sign that Hannah had uncovered something related to Father Michael's deceit, and she may have planned to unlock this secret vault before she was silenced. Without hesitation, David decided to follow this new clue. With Duke, Hannah's loyal dog, by his side, they began their journey to uncover the secret storage the key would open. They followed a map David found in an old book Hannah had left behind, leading them to a section of the church that few people knew about. After finding a hidden entrance behind a small door at the far corner of the church, David and Duke quietly stepped inside. The air was damp and dark, the thick stone walls casting shadows, with faint light from oil lamps barely illuminating the space. The corridor led deep into the darkened interior, but David wasn't afraid. His resolve grew stronger with each step. Every move he made felt like a vow that he wouldn't let the truth remain buried. At the end of the corridor, David and Duke found a large door inscribed with ancient characters. David tried the key, and it fit perfectly. The door creaked open, revealing a hidden room inside. Although the room was not large, it contained all the evidence David needed to expose Father Michael's crimes. As he stepped inside, his eyes were drawn to piles of donation money neatly stacked in wooden crates. Receipts and ledgers clearly marked Father Michael's embezzlement, showing massive sums of money that had been taken and misused. David felt as though all his doubts and questions throughout the investigation were answered in that instant. These piles of money weren't just proof of corruption. They were proof of a betrayal of the community's trust. Father Michael had exploited the faith of his followers to enrich himself while they had devoted everything to the church. David quickly gathered the evidence, preparing to bring it out and expose the truth. He couldn't let Father Michael continue hiding his crimes. But before he could leave, a strange change in the atmosphere made him feel that something was wrong. Duke, Hannah's loyal dog, suddenly stood still, alert. David's footsteps slowed as he realized that Father Michael might know he was uncovering the truth. David turned around, left the hidden storage, and quickly exited, carrying the box of crucial evidence. He knew that what needed to be done now was to bring the truth to the village. His heart raced as he walked toward the village, where everyone was waiting for the answers to the mysteries they had long avoided. With everything he had uncovered, David was preparing for a great challenge, a confrontation with Father Michael and a community divided by the truth. Returning to the village, David brought the evidence and was ready to face everyone. He wasn't just bringing the truth about Father Michael. He was bringing an end to a secret that had been concealed for so long. He led the people to the church, where this secret would be revealed, and the truth would finally come to light. Father Michael, once revered and loved by everyone, could no longer maintain his calm composure. As all the dark secrets about him were exposed, the priest tried to flee. But David and the Duke did not let him escape. With determination and courage, they stopped Father Michael right at the door of the church, where all the truth was about to be revealed. As Father Michael was detained, the villagers began to realize what had happened. Those who had always trusted and revered him could no longer believe what they were witnessing. People stood still, their eyes filled with confusion and shock. The truth about Hannah's death and Father Michael's corruption had been exposed, eroding the image of him that they once held dear. David and Duke, the ones who had never stopped seeking the truth, were the ones who had brought light to the darkness. Father Michael had kept hidden for so long. The truth about Hannah's death had been revealed, and justice had finally been served. This story serves as a great lesson in courage and honesty. Sometimes, the truth may be hidden in the darkness, but with determination and perseverance, it will eventually come to light. Thank you for listening to this story. Remember, no matter how difficult the circumstances, always stay true to the truth and seek justice. Justice always prevails, and light will always dispel darkness. I wish you all strength and courage in your lives, and never give up on uncovering the truth, no matter how challenging it may be.